In the dark hellscape of a post-apocalyptic future, the bombs may have gone off years ago, but the scars remain. Here, in this wasteland, a small family comes together, and they will sing. The atmosphere of your world must match your setting in a kind of synergy that doesn't feel out of place. The problem with that is a road to cliches that lies ahead of us. So I'll be your map as we walk through these cannibal-infested hills. I'm DC Ferguson, and this is the Worldbuilding Dojo. We know if we're doing some kind of journey through a post-apocalyptic expanse, the overarching atmosphere is going to be bleak or desperate. That's just basic stuff if you pay attention to films and books of the genre. We're not looking for surface stuff like that. What we're looking at is the atmosphere that best suits your story in your world, regardless of the genre tropes and settings. So, in order to understand that, we want to know what story we're trying to tell. While you're the only person who can determine that, I do have some tips for the broad strokes. First of all, keep in mind that the atmosphere of your story does go hand in hand with some of the other topics we've been talking about lately, namely setting, pace, and tone. As such, you can delightfully play with tropes here, such as using our aforementioned post-apocalyptic setting as a place where romance blooms, making your zombie-filled wasteland a romantic comedy/date movie, such as the film Warm Bodies. Another tip for the big picture of your atmosphere is how you want it to move and dictate your characters and narrative. So for that, we're going to get into example time, doing a deep cut early. You've earned it. This time, we're looking at 12 Angry Men, both the original 1957 film and its nearly identical 1997 counterpart. Originally written for the stage, the film is set in the jury deliberation room of a courthouse, while the 12 jurors are mulling over the guilt or innocence of a young man in a murder case. As such, the film never leaves this cramped, confined room. It's summer, and it's hot. So we have a hot summer day, trapped in a room with 12 dudes. If everyone felt one way or another about the verdict, then everybody leaves in 20 minutes and calls it a day. But a dispute over the case leads to an all-out war to seek the truth and overcome the individual motivations and prejudices of the jurors. Now, from the description, if you've never seen the film, you can imagine how tense and claustrophobic the atmosphere is in this film. Whether you watch the original or the remake, they both stay incredibly faithful to the stage play's script, which is important because touching this work is blasphemy. It is a classic of the American stage and nearly flawless. The role of the heat that plays into the film almost makes it a character unto itself, a devil on each man's shoulder trying to get them the heck out of that room, or try killing the guy next to him as they argue. One character has tickets for a baseball game that he'd much rather be at on such a beautiful day, egging him to join with whatever path of least resistance gets him out the door first. When I thought about examples to talk about atmosphere, this was the first one to jump to mind because we're stripped down so much. Without a change in setting at all, atmosphere gets to shine as it plays a large role in the actions, reactions, and motivations of the characters. You should study this one closely for the lesson, as it's woven so much into the story that the characters literally can't escape it. Though I really do get tired of using The Matrix as an example on here, the first film does so much right that is a 400-pound gorilla in the room whenever you're using sci-fi and fantasy examples of world building. So, here we go again. If you look at the world within The Matrix and the world outside of it, atmosphere changes dramatically. And this isn't just some snazzy cinematography such as the blue light of the real world and the greenish hue of The Matrix, although there's a lesson on dramatic lighting in there all by itself. The real world is shabby clothes, crappy food, dirty skin, cramped quarters, technology held together by rubber bands and duct tape. The Nebuchadnezzar is cramped and claustrophobic. It's desperate. Contrast that against the scenes inside the Matrix. The citizens around them are soft and sheep, busying themselves like ants. The protagonists wear stylish clothes that make them look like badasses. They're powerful because they're free of their chains. The world is open and expansive because it's their sandbox. They understand it's not real. Even when they're on the run, they're experiencing freedom. I bring that up to say this. When you nail down the atmosphere for a location, a setting, or the general feel for your whole story, you need to be careful not to lay it on too thick. What we don't want is to commit ourselves and fall in love with our concept and our atmosphere so much that we lose sight of what we're doing. As an example for this, I bring up the 2016 sci-fi film Passengers. The film does a phenomenal job of lying to us. On the surface, it seems that two people are awakened during a lengthy cryosleep. As romance blooms between them, they realize that there's a reason they were awakened. Now, take everything I just said and forget it, because what actually happens is Chris Pratt's character awakens from cryosleep due to a damaged pod. He finds that he's very early into nearly 100-year voyage to another world. In short, he'll be dead of old age before he ever sees another living person again. The atmosphere of loneliness and desperation leads him to try everything to get back to sleep, to alert the crew, even tries killing himself. In this particular regard, the film uses atmosphere very well, with vast stretches of empty halls, every food he could ever want but no one to share it with, rows of people that are all asleep, taunting him. The film goes sideways when, in his desperation, he becomes obsessed with one passenger in particular and falls in love with her from his video diaries. He then releases her from the pod, effectively condemning this stranger to the exact same fate as him, in a desperate bid to make her fall in love with him because he's literally the last man she's ever going to know. See, we spend so much time with the atmosphere of loneliness that there's an expectation on the writer's part that we'll have grown so sympathetic to his plight, we understand this heinous act he inflicts on this woman he's never met. Instead, our protagonist comes off as a creepy stalker, and the romance that unfolds makes your skin crawl. You don't ever forgive him for this act that he's done in the story, even as it keeps chugging along as a romance from there. I could go on with this particular example for a while, but rather than spoil the ending for anyone, I will say that this writer thought he was writing a space romance about true love and unintentionally wrote a stalker movie about Stockholm Syndrome. Seriously, the trailer intrigued me greatly. The film? Well, it creeped me out. The point here is, don't ever let the atmosphere you're creating blind you to the realities of situations you're putting your characters through. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to take a shower after talking about that movie. It can be really tricky navigating the space of creative writing because so many terms can be mistaken for one another, and sometimes terms overlap. This can be especially difficult when you're given critiques because sometimes you have to use your knowledge of these terms to interpret the feedback you're getting. That said, we're just going to cover a few of these terms as it leads to the bigger point we're making here. That's right, more charts. Setting is the place where our story happens. This can be a locale, such as Washington, D.C., or a more generic thing, like space. Pace is the speed that the story moves, usually fastest for action, slowest for drama. Tone is the feel of the work when taken as a whole. For example, a black comedy is usually one that is funny, while the subject matter that you're laughing at is incredibly dark. Dark would be the tone. Genre is the category of your story. So, for example, Firefly is often referred to as a space western. In this example, space is the setting and western is the genre. That's why people call it that even though it's not in the American West with a bunch of cowboys. Western is a style, a category that falls between crime and action-adventure. Now, I reminded you of all of that so we can stack on one more element to your repertoire, and that's today's topic, atmosphere. The reason I brought this up is that it's incredibly easy to mistake or confuse atmosphere and genre. Since it's so much easier for us to see the difference when we're looking at examples, we're going to compare and contrast this classic sci-fi film Blade Runner and its recent sequel Blade Runner 2049. Blade Runner is the 1982 cyberpunk masterpiece based on our man Philip K. Dick's novel Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. If you're not familiar with this film, you need to stop this video, go watch it, come on back. It's an incredibly important film. It's basically required watching if you're a fan of sci-fi at all. So, now that you're back, let's talk about the film. The first thing you may have noticed is that I say it's sci-fi and you say it's sci-fi, but you probably also notice it's a noir film. Noir is one of our genres here. in addition to cyberpunk, which sits under the sci-fi umbrella. The noir aspect, though, that's the part that's separate of sci-fi's magic umbrella. This is where the storytelling elements get to kick in and bring something totally different to the table. Noir normally likes to bring its own atmosphere and tone. The tone is typically dark, and the atmosphere is one of danger all around us. We're mired in the dirt of the darkest elements of society, but our protagonist belongs there. He's part of the muck, so he'll wallow around in it to find the justice that he's looking for. And that's exactly what you see happening in Blade Runner. Harrison Ford's Rick Deckard is a man of these dark elements. He's not just used to it, he lives in it. Now, I want you to keep the picture of this atmosphere in this film in your mind. The busy world around him, the sleaze of the Sector 4 bars, how even the good guys use blackmail to get Deckard onto his mission. Now let's walk over to the sequel. Blade Runner 2049 does not use noir at all. As such, the story it carries is still dark, dramatic, and bleak. Because this film duplicated the atmosphere of the original, but did not adopt the genre, what you get is this, and this, and this. Did you see it? There aren't people in these shots. As a matter of fact, the vast majority of this movie is Ryan Gosling's Kay interacting with one or two people with virtually no ambiance at all. The world feels sparse, and not in a good way. It's empty in a weird, I thought this city had 106 million people in it kind of way. So the setting feels off, and it's using a noir atmosphere without the noir. So the bleakness that's coming from an overcrowded city, it's from the battles that Kay is waging with his lonely, empty existence as a Blade Runner. He's not bouncing off of the city or the people, as noir often does, and this leaves an uneven pace with these long, quiet scenes in these empty landscapes, while we wait for another person to show up so we can advance the plot. Additionally, we look at the original for contrast, and we see the love interest subplot and the misunderstood villain provides us with these incredible rises and falls in the story despite the dark tone. There's a faint glimmer that resembles hope. In comparison to the sequel, the tone isn't just dark, it's downright depressing, and since it similarly ends on a bittersweet, tragic note, it never gets any better. This is what happens when you're not juggling your elements correctly. The original is a masterpiece that makes you talk about the philosophy of what life truly is and the persistence of memory. The sequel makes you feel like you watched a really long, depressing movie that didn't accomplish much. It's sad, really, but Harrison Ford seems to like to keep coming back to his old characters so he can give a new generation of writers a chance to screw them up, and they do. So now we know what the atmosphere of our work will be, from dark and brooding to cheery and hopeful, but we need to be flexible. Just like tone and pace, our individual scenes can have differing atmosphere. If you've seen my earlier videos, then you know I've talked a lot lately about using humor like a scalpel. In the same way that it affects tone and pacing, it also lightens the mood of your atmosphere and should only be used sparingly unless you're actually writing a comedy. We're going to dive into examples in a moment, but some of what I'm going to touch on you've seen before. We've seen a point-of-view camera stalking someone from a hidden position, coming up slowly behind them, only for the surprise jump scare to be some guy popping up with flowers or something like lame like that. This is actually a play on atmosphere, creating a hidden person that watches as someone goes about their daily routine, unaware of the person that we see through the eyes of. It's tension-inducing, and that's because we're wired to that the unknown around us, the unseen, is usually a danger. Creating such atmosphere for any kind of payoff, be it comedic, romantic, or deadly, is using atmosphere to create an emotion in our audience with subtle detail. Now, let's look at this when it's used incorrectly. This scene. Oh god, this freaking scene. In The Matrix Reloaded, as Neo arrives at the center of the machine that basically controls the functioning of the Matrix, what should follow is a meeting between the protagonist and antagonist amidst great tension. Neo can undo and break the rules of his little machine, and this guy has all of humanity under his thumb. Instead, Neo stays the course of being the badass I-can-stop-anything superhero that he became at the start of the second film, while the antagonist is flippant, doesn't feel threatened in the slightest and uses complicated verbose dialogue to explain what is basically a fairly simple concept. He speaks on such a needlessly high level that this conversation actually bewildered a majority of the audience that went to see it, and the other chunk asking, I mean, I get it, but why is he talking like that? What you end up with is a conversation that feels like it has incredibly high stakes and great revelations, but really amounts to the antagonist giving our hero a threat, and they go about their day. There's no desperation from Neo to understand. We just take it at face value. He understood all those big words, and the revelation neither moves him nor takes him off his tough guy attitude he's on. Basically, the atmosphere of the scene should have brought out a lot more reaction from these two characters, but Neo is effectively the same person he was coming out of this scene as he was going in. And the atmosphere tells us it should be otherwise. The sense of tension has been dialed up to 11, but he's as cool as if he was, fighting 100 guys, kind of stuff that happens every day. The lesson here is that the devil is in the details. Your readers are not the only ones reacting to the atmosphere of a scene. You need to make sure your characters can feel it too. Atmosphere is one of the more intangible essences of writing, and it can be darn tricky to put down correctly. Always make sure that the feel of your work reflects the tone, the pace, and the genre you're writing for. I'm also super happy this week to mention our featured work, which is the Colossus collection by Nicole Grotepas. She has just released this box set of books 1 through 4. In it, someone frees hero Holly Drake from a prison sentence in exchange for her help with stealing the priceless jewel Eye of the Colossus. It's a super cool space saga with a strong female heroine. I have a link in the description box down below, so make sure to check it out. And if you're an author and would like me to take a look at your work and recommend it on Worldbuilding Dojo, get in touch with me. I'm always happy to cross-promote and work with indie authors. You'll also find in the description box a link to my mailing list. You can sign up for my newsletter and get all the latest goings-on with the Dragon's Dream saga. Help out the Master of Kung Fu and Friendship by hitting that like and subscribe button to hear about new videos. As always, I'm DC Ferguson. Now have fun and get crafting.